Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. I'm Kumi Kogahara, a director of HR Consulting Department of Adecco Japan. And this is Yuichi Yamamoto. He leads our Human Capital Management Consulting Group. And this is Fumiaki Yoshimizu. He is also an expert of Human Capital Management. And I would like to welcome Helen Tomlinson. Hi, Helen.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, everybody, for inviting me here today.
So welcome to Japan. So could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Helen Tomlinson. I'm the head of talent and inclusion for the Adecco UK and I group. And I have an additional role. I work for the UK government as their menopause employment champion, working with UK businesses to drive gender equity and help to support smaller businesses who may not have the resources and infrastructure of larger employers.
Thank you so much. So before we move on to the main topic, I would like to provide a quick overview of our HR consulting department. We were established in 2021 and we have about 25 HR consultants. All members, including myself, joined this company in 2021 or after, so we are still new here. And in terms of HR consulting division, we have more than 100 professionals on board. And we cover a wide range of areas in HR, such as recruiting, organization development, talent development, HR system, and human capital management. And today's topic is exchange of information and opinions on human capital management in Europe and Japan. And human capital management has been a kind of buzzword in Japan since 2022. And here is the first question. Have there been any changes in how each countries view human capital recently? If so, what kind of changes have been observed? In Japanese case, as you already know that there has been a transition from the concept of human resources to the concept of human capital in recent years. Human resources is the concept of preventing resources degradation by investing in education and improving conditions viewed as a cost. On the other hand, human capital is the concept of investing in education and improving conditions to promote capital growth viewed as an investment. So this is Japanese case. So can you explain about the case in Europe, please?
Absolutely. So I think very much like many countries, we are in a talent scarce market. So it's very important for organizations to attract and retain their talent in a really strategic way. So upskilling, reskilling, looking at the opportunities within the business, looking at the people in the business and seeing what they can do, as opposed to looking at what they are necessarily experienced in and qualified to do, is really important to organizations. So we don't see it as a cost, we see it as a way of creating opportunity for people in organizations. And I think more and more companies are looking at it in that regard and making sure, we know that the retirement age is increasing. So we will all have to work longer. The birth rate is dropping. So we're not being replaced as quickly as a lot of countries would like. So what that means is that we're having to look and, we might have 3 or 4 careers in our lifetime. So I'll give you a live example. So I'd worked in recruitment, operations and sales for my entire career. And I started in the recruitment and employability sector in 1995, but this is my first role in a non-sales or operational environment. And it came about because of a restructure during the pandemic. And I saw this as an opportunity to take my career in a different direction. So, but it's important that you have the support of the organization to be able to do that, because it's a very, very difficult challenge if the organization isn't backing you. But we have in the UK what we call a capability framework. and many organizations adopt this model. So it basically shows you when you join an organization what roles are available, what the remuneration package looks like in those roles, and what skills you need at what level to be able to do those roles. And then it's incumbent on your line manager, yourself, the talent partner, the HR department to upskill you to be able to do that role that you want to do. So we see it as a lifelong opportunity to upskill, develop, reskill, and enjoy a lengthy career.
一個質問なんですけど、日本では結構人を大切にするって昔からある考え方で、ヨーロッパを考えると結構新しい考え方なのか、昔からある考え方なのかっていうのもちょっと聞いてみたかったんですけど、いかがですか？はい。
There has definitely been an evolution. It hasn't always been that way, but it also depends on the organization. So some organizations see more value in thinking about human capital as opposed to human resources. So those are the ones that have better retention, create better opportunity for their employees. But we focus very much on career development as a big part of that evaluation process, whether that be an annual evaluation or whether that is more in the moment evaluation. So when we talk to our teams, we talk very much about, so this is what your objectives were, this is how you've achieved against your objectives, and that's a very collaborative process which again values that human capital as opposed to just a resource. And then we talk about, so what's next, and we're really positive about that what's next, even if that what's next doesn't include the relationship that we have. It may be that they want to do something entirely different, but those are the companies that really value individuals and human capital and make sure that transition is smooth, as opposed to just holding on to them because they don't want to lose the resource. So it's a really good question, and that has evolved over time, definitely.
今後日本はやっぱり少子高齢化が一番早いと言われています。で、やっぱり海外に比べると、やっぱり海外はまだまだ少子高齢化というのは進んでないという中でも、人がやっぱり取りにくくなるっていうところの部分は、すごい優秀な人が取りにくくなってくるのか、それとも全体としても労働市場が、いわゆるに対して人が足りなくなっているのか、この部分の傾向って日本と違いはありますか？
So I think that it's right across the board. So we have an aging population as well. It's probably not as profound or as prolific as you're seeing at the moment, but absolutely, we are looking to attract at all levels, whether that be highly skilled, where it's more about career mobility and moving from role to role at a senior level, or whether it's about attracting new talent into the workforce and what we have to offer as an organization. I think employee value proposition has never been as important, and we're seeing a real shift in that, whether because it's now more about purpose, inclusion, what we can offer the individual in terms of that experiential life, as opposed to just what the company does. Whereas probably generationally, it was more about what the benefits of the company were, what the salary was, what the working hours look like, but it's much more nuanced than that now. So we're at every level, we are looking to attract and retain talent. We are also looking to retain people beyond what's perceived as the average working age, and how we can look to reskill, refocus those individuals as well. So particularly retaining women in the workforce is a challenge, and that's part of why I have the government role to attract and retain women at midlife in the workplace. So it's a really important feature in order to address our talent scarcity, that we retain, but not just attract as many young workers into all areas of working life, but we also retain and attract back in some workers who may be economically inactive at the moment. So our unemployment rates are very low compared to, say, 10 years ago. However, there are still people who could be working that aren't, and we need to understand why and bring them back into the workplace. And they tend to be the harder to help or the further away from the labour market. So we do have to do more work to bring them back into the working world.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. ある調査結果によると、日本の従業員エンゲージメントは世界各国と比べて最低水準にあるということです。勤勉で真面目な国民性である日本人が働くことの喜びを感じるためには、何が必要でしょうか？
左側が世界、右側がアジアのエンゲージメントスコアっていうのを表現しています。で、日本は 5% っていうエンゲージメントの比率で非常に低いっていうのがずっと問題というかテーマになっていますと。これどうやってこれを改善していくかとかっていうのは各企業とかクライアントがすごく努力しているところなんですけど、これに対して何かアドバイスとか示唆とかがあればいただきたいかなと思ってますと。はい。
So that's a really interesting survey, isn't it? And what I'm particularly interested in, and I can't hugely comment on this, but the fact that the USA and Canada are at the top of the finding the joy in working leaderboard, if that's what you want to call it. And actually, they have the lowest number of holidays, pretty much globally, I think. So that is a really interesting concept, because that leads me to think it's all about what matters to that individual or culturally. Anybody who I've worked with would say my holidays are very important to me, because I work very long hours, as many people do, work very hard, but as long as I know I've got a break coming up, I'm okay. So I feel like that's a reward to myself. So I would really struggle, I think, in that environment. But there is a very old saying that says, if you find a job you love, you will never work a day in your life. And I believe that is really important, but I think it's about what's important to the individual. So you are never going to find a job that every single person in the organization is loving 100% of the time. That's just not how it works. But I think if you can find that joy, as you call it, and it's really hard to describe because one person's joy is entirely different. So if you're in the job that matches your skill set, if it meets your IQ, EQ, whatever you want to call it, I think that is a really fundamental part of it. So I often say this isn't work because I enjoy it so much and I get so much from it. So for me, it's because it meets my skill set really, and it's probably a skill set that's been dormant for many, many years. I did performing arts at university and always wanted to be a performer, and now I probably am as close as I will ever be to being that. So it meets my core fundamental skill set really well. So that's why I find a lot of joy in what I do. So I can only translate that to it being about, creating opportunity in a business to let somebody do what they are really passionate about. And I know that's not always possible or practical, but certainly having a strong ED&I presence, so having those equity, diversity and inclusion forums, creating purposeful opportunity, I think that's really important in a business, because if you can't have your dream day job, and not everybody can, giving them an outlet or giving them something that meets their personal goals and passions is really important. So I think that's something to really focus on, because sometimes work can be hard. I know culturally you work probably very long hours, you work very hard, you are very committed to your job, and that's as it should be. But I think if you create opportunity around that for people to really get something out of it, it comes back to your employee value proposition. When we're going out to advertise for staff in the UK, very often organizations use what they do in addition to the job. The job is the job. It's a little bit like recruitment. The job is tough. We know that. It's a lot of repetition. It's a lot of hard work. But our sell externally is our ED&I culture, our sense of belonging, our sense of inclusion, our purpose. And that is what we want people to buy into, not the fundamentals necessarily of the job. So I don't know if I had all the answers, we would be further up that table. But you know, it's a really interesting concept. But I can only share what, you know, in Western Europe, I think having that, and obviously COVID has created a much better work-life balance than we ever had. And there are some challenges around that for sure. But if you think back to, I think it was the 23rd of March 2020, we evolved in one day about 25 years in terms of work-life balance, because literally we took our laptops or our desktops and we went home. And, you know, to create that culture would have taken, well, you know, the saying is we evolved 25 years in one day, and that's phenomenal. So that's changed a lot. But obviously we were talking earlier, a group of us, around the impact that on Generation Z, who are just coming into the workplace, and the impact it's had on them. So it's never going to be perfect, but I think if you can find some passion, some purpose, some element of inclusion, that's what really drives employees, but as opposed to just the fundamentals of the job, for sure.
今の話がすごい面白かったのが、やっぱり日本ってあまり転職が一般的じゃない。つまりその終身雇用っていうモデルでやってるので、やっぱり経験ってすごい幅が狭いのが多いなと思いました。なので、いろんな転職をして、自分のもともと持っているスキルとコラボレーションするっていう機会があまりないなっていうのが、非常に問題だなっていうのを感じました。で、もう一つちょっと聞きたいのは、最近日本の中では、いわゆるワークライフバランスだけじゃなくて、ワークイズライフみたいな形で、ワーケーションみたいに仕事と、いわゆるプライベートを一緒にしていくみたいな流れはあるんですけども、この流れって海外の方でもあるような流れなんでしょうか？
No, I'll take your first point first, that, you know, I completely understand that culturally you have had a job for life almost, and that is a term that in the UK and in wider Europe is used as well. It used to be a job for life. Probably it's a generational piece. So yeah, my parents' generation pretty much went into an organization, or even my grandparents went into an organization, stayed until they retired, took their pension and their gift for staying so long. They probably got a gold clock or something like that for staying. But generationally, so my generation, we don't see that as much. Having said that, particularly, you know, I've probably only worked for 5 companies in the last 30 years, and some of those with great tenure. But I have colleagues that have only ever worked in Adecco in the UK, from leaving school or university to now. Some of them are 35, 40 years plus. So it is changing, definitely. And we were just saying this morning that we'd looked at an article around Gen Z, and they will have 10 jobs on average between the ages of 18 and 34. So it's going to be much more of a transient workforce, and naturally skills will move from company to company. So it's more the concept of a job for life is definitely in a decline, but it's also a real shift that the employee is taking their skills to an organization, sharing their skills with that organization, and then when the time is right for them, moving on to another organization. So I think that's a really different dynamic. And I really like the concept of going on, taking your work somewhere else with you. And we don't have that as much. Some organizations have the maybe working some part of the week together and some part of the week from wherever. But actually taking your work on holiday is just starting to be seen as more of a negative thing, actually. That it used to be the preserve of very senior leaders to be seen, you know, on the beach with their family, and they'd be on their mobile phones chatting and things. So that's not as commonplace now, but we do get on average Obviously, we have certainly in the UK, a number of bank holidays where pretty much all businesses are closed. And then we have holiday on top of that we can take. So there isn't as much of a concept of working from somewhere else, only in really isolated cases where people might have partners that live in other countries and they want to go and spend time with them, but that's on an individual and kind of manager by manager basis more than the norm. But I would love to see that.
Thank you.
So let's move on to the third question. There seems to be a tendency of relatively weaker adaptability to their careers in response to environment changes among Japanese workers, especially senior employees. How do you perceive this trend?
キャリア自立のお話です。で、男女ともに自分で自分のキャリアを決められると思っている人がとても少ないっていうのが、これも日本の特徴としてよく挙げられています。で、比較しているのが、ドイツとフランスとの比較になっています。で、これをもうちょっとやっぱ自分でキャリアを決めていきましょうっていう流れはあるんですけど、なかなかそこに至れない方が多いので、ちょっとこれについてもなんかお取り組みとか課題とか教えていただければなというふうに思っています。はい。
So I think one of the key aspects of it, which is really hard to create, is mindset, and that is partly why I mentioned the capability framework earlier, which is something that helps people to see where they could go in their career, and rather than worrying about have I got the skills to be able to do that, how do I get the skills, showing them what skills they would need and to what level, and then creating a platform for them to get those skills. That for me is the surest way of creating that career change for somebody. And even I've seen in the last few years that more and more people are thinking about, I don't want to give up work. A lot of people genuinely don't want to not work, but they also don't want to work in the role or at the pace that they're working at now. So they're starting to think about their glide path in their sort of later years of their career and what that could look like. So I think that's really important, to be able to have an honest conversation to say, I don't necessarily want to do what I'm doing now forever, but thinking about the skills that you've got, what could you do with them in another role, or how you could become, the largest growth in entrepreneurship is actually in women over 50. So there's a perception that being an entrepreneur is for young people. That's not factually correct. Particularly, that's what we see in the UK and Ireland, because actually women over 50 are finding that corporate culture isn't serving them anymore for whatever reason. It could be because it doesn't offer the flexibility that they need, or they just feel like they could be doing more. So we're seeing a real trend to that happening, which I think is really interesting, that people are taking control of their later life career, whereas a generation ago, when if you became unemployed, particularly for a man in midlife, it was very hard to think, well, I need to go back in my next job at the same level that I was at previously, and often that didn't happen. So that could really have a negative mental health impact, whereas now we're seeing more men sort of switching careers, and actually mentorship has provided a great opportunity there for people to be more adept in their career and really be able to talk about what it is that I want to do. And I'm often asked, what do you want to do next? So it is becoming much more commonplace to have that conversation, which I think is really important. But it's also important to have diverse senior leaders, both in terms of seniority, but also in terms of generational difference. Because if you're from a different generation and coming through in your career, as an example, female leadership, if you can't see it, you can't be it. So if you're not seeing female leaders, it's going to be very hard for younger generations in the workforce, particularly women, to aspire to be leaders, because they don't see what good looks like. So it's a bit of a, you know, that's an issue. But yeah, I think being able to take your career into your own hands and looking at the future is becoming much more normalized in the UK and across Europe, which I think is really positive.
Okay, while Japanese companies often prioritize talent development within human capital management, what's the emphasis in European companies?
人的資本ってやっぱり日本だとどちらかというと、市場、マーケットからどういうふうに評価されるかっていうところもあると思うんですけども、まあ、企業側の人に私もいろいろ話をしながら、人的資本の中で何を重視してますかって話をすると、まあ、エンゲージメントは皆さん一番上に来るんですけども、次に多いのがやっぱり人材開発、人材育成という項目が多くなっています。まあ、その次にダイバーシティ、コンプライアンスという順になっているんですけども、やはり日本の中でも人的資本の中でも特に人材開発、人材育成を重視するという傾向にあるのかなと思うんですが、これ海外と日本では大きな違いはあるんでしょうか？
We don't have that level of disclosure, so we don't have to disclose that. There are other things that we have to disclose, things like gender parity from a pay perspective, which would potentially feed into that. But I would have, if you'd asked me to rank what I thought would be most important to an organization, I would have said employee engagement right at the top, because quite honestly, if you haven't got employee engagement, you can't develop the other strategies that you need to develop. And human capital development for me is, well, I would say that's my job. But I see more and more organizations looking at how they develop leadership pipeline, how they look at the talent that they've got and see how they're going to get it to the next level and harness it, help it to evolve. So that's very important to most organizations. Whereas I think historically, you, even in my career, you would see people being brought in a lot more rather than grown in the organization. And I think that really changes the culture, because it shows that there's opportunity now to grow in an organization. But previously, bringing people in to plug a gap where you didn't have the talent, or it was perceived that the talent wasn't ready, and it was almost what we would call football manager syndrome. So you bring somebody in from the outside because as soon as a new manager joins a football team, they think everything's going to be better than it was before. And actually, it's the players that make the team, not necessarily the manager. So using that analogy, you used to think, oh, if we bring somebody in, we'll sort out all the challenges, when actually it is better to support an individual to grow into that role, even if they're not quite ready. And if you put that support mechanism around them, they will be more successful. So I see human capital development as being a key priority across the UK and Europe.
ありがとうございます。ちょっともう少し深掘りで聞きたいんですけども、まあ、そこになると日本の項目リーダーシップってまあまあ低いなと思ってるんですよ。で、そこに加えて考えるのが、やっぱり日本ってリーダーシップって中で生え抜きで上がっていくっていう文化がすごいある一方で、なかなか上から外から持ってきてリーダーシップが変わるってあんまり日本ではまだ少ないという状況だと思っています。そうすると、中のメンバーとしては、やっぱりリーダーになっていきたいと中で思わせるのが重要かなと思っていて、まあ、外から逆に引っ張ってこられちゃうと、自分でそこの中で上がっていけないんだっていう思っちゃう方も結構いるかなと思っています。で、まあ、そういうところもあって、今、日本の中では結構管理職疲れ、マネージャーになりたくないみたいな話も結構増えてくるっていうのは、まあ、リーダーシップを育てたい企業というところと、リーダーにその会社になりたくない個人というのは結構ギャップが生まれてるなと思うんですけれども、この分海外ではどんなふうに解決をしているのか、もしくはそのリーダーシップの概念自体が違うのかというところも教えていただければと思いますが、いかがでしょうか。
We absolutely see that. So we, in our capability framework, we have different personas, and one of the personas is a career climber. So somebody who wants to develop their career, get to the next level, etc. But we also have a master of craft role, and that is to help support people who want to be don't want to move up, they want to carry on being managers, etc., but they want to develop and they want to grow within their role to stop that, but that just they don't want to stagnate necessarily, they want to grow and develop. So we create a program for them as well of development. And another interesting aspect on that, so we do see that, we see, but we also see younger generations coming through and seeing, you know, those leaders are exhausted, I don't want to be like that, and having a different perception of work-life balance, of what's important to them. And actually there was a survey done across the UK recently, it might have been the US actually, because it was a McKinsey survey, and they said that ranked out of 20 aspirations, Gen Z girls particularly put leadership roles as 17th. So that is a real, you know, issue moving forward, looking at gender parity, and what are they seeing in their role models? Are they seeing that they are exhausted from juggling everything? And we need to change that perception. And we were talking this morning about an article that I'd seen in the last few days, that actually the Gen Z coming into the business now, into the business world, do not want to emulate what they see as their parents' generation, and how, you know, what their work-life balance was like, you know, the things that they had to sacrifice. 50% of Gen Z parents are divorced. That's probably a UK statistic, but they see what working hard has done to them, and they don't necessarily want to emulate it. So you're right, it is a real risk that we've got an eye on, to think, you know, if that is if that's what we're showing, and that's the perception that we're creating, that being a leader is exhausting, will people want to do it in the future? And something that I've picked up quite recently is that I always check my emails on holiday, and I always have done, and that works for me, and I'm really comfortable doing that. But what people in my team have said to me is, and I don't expect them to do that at all, it's my personal choice. They said, but by default, you are creating a perception where we now feel that because you check your email on holiday, we should do it too, and I don't want to create that. So I've made a conscious effort not to do that, because of what it imparts to my team, not because it just means to me that I've got a lot more work to do when I come back. But if it's making other generations feel that they've got to do that, I don't want to do that, because I don't want them to think that being a leader in a business means you're having to check your email all the time. It's like what we were saying earlier about the old you know, stereotype of the man being on the beach with his mobile phone to his ear while his kids are playing. We want to eradicate that. So I feel that I have to do my bit to make sure we do eradicate that.
Thank you so much. We have learned a lot.
As have I. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before we finished, could you share a message with our viewers?
Of course. So I think, you know, a lot of the challenges that you face here are very, very similar to the ones we face in the UK and Ireland. And I think focusing on people as individuals and really developing them, helping them to share their passions, will absolutely get the most out of them, help you to retain staff. And by virtue of doing that, if you share that as part of your employee value proposition, it will help you to attract the very best in human capital in order for you to be able to develop them and retain them in your organization.